From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Call on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Today we're privileged to have as our special guest, representing the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, Congressman Steve LaTourette. Serving in his 8th term in the House of Representatives, Steve serves with me on the Appropriations Committee. And today we're going to be talking about the ever so controversial subject of health care reform. Congressman, it's really great to have you here.
Tom, thanks for having me.
Now, I got to begin by saying I actually get to sit next to you on 2 subcommittees on appropriations. And just so our listeners know, it was quite a tremendous sacrifice for you to move to appropriations. You were very senior on transportation and financial services. Why'd you make that move?
Well, it was really a regional thing, which you'll understand, in that we had 2 high-ranking members on the Appropriations Committee that retired. From Ohio. And they were going to, we were going to be without a Republican on appropriations for the first time in 50 years. And so there's a lot of competition for the slots, and I basically had enough seniority to give up to put me in the running, and I'm happy to be there. Well,
it's great to have you there, and I believe me, I know what you mean. I'm the only Oklahoman on appropriations in either chamber and either party. Yeah. And a lot of heavy lifting. See, I was asking you that just to kind of shamelessly toot my own horn.
Well, I'll toot it some more because you, particularly on the Interior Subcommittee, I enjoy sitting next to you because you have been, we've only been at it now for 9 months, but if it wasn't for your knowledge and concern about Native American issues, I wouldn't really be up to speed. I mean, from Cleveland, we got the Cleveland Indians, that's about it.
Well, we have your Shawnees, we have your Miamis.
That's what I'm talking about.
They're all down in our country now.
But you've really, brought me along on those issues. You try and be up on everything, but you can't, and if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be.
Well, you kind of say that. Just before we get into the substance, we'll be mutually complimentary here, just so our audience knows. You are one of those guys that I think on both sides of the aisle is widely regarded as a legislator's legislator. I mean, you're really here, you do serious work, you're genuinely bipartisan, and you're extraordinarily thoughtful. In other words, you're not like almost any other member of Congress. It's a little bit different, but it's been a pleasure to be with you.
Me too.
But let's talk a little bit about what all the rest of the country's talking about right now, which is health care reform. And again, because you are a legislator's legislator and look a lot at this, we've begun to have some pretty serious CBO questions about the health care reform. Congressional Budget Office. The President laid out, a goal that health care reform is going to be budget neutral. Tell me whether or not you think that's deficit neutral, whether or not that's going to be possible with the House bill that we have or what you see emerging over in the Senate.
Well, it's absolutely not going to be possible. I mean, how can you... whatever the number is, whether it's 47 million Americans, the president said 30 million Americans, other people think it's 12 million Americans don't have health care. Well, how can you insure 47 million more people and not have it cost any money? I mean, that just flies in the face of common sense. And it was actually, when the president came and gave his talk, he said that there's 80% we can agree on. I agree with him. But it's that 20% that they just won't let go of. That's causing all this controversy. And aside from it not being deficit neutral, I've been here long enough, and I know you've been here and back. In 1996, we proposed some savings in Medicare. It was $296 billion over 10 years. The president is trying to take $500 billion out of Medicare, and nobody's saying a peep. I mean, the AARP's not saying a peep. So the only way he gets within $1 trillion of deficit neutrality is by taking a lot of money out of other programs.
Well, I know in my district, I'm sure it's the same years in August, a lot of people were peeping pretty loud. I mean, and frankly, particularly seniors who would seize on that and make 2 points. Number one, they were skeptical that it was possible. Right. They hoped it was. But if it was possible, why wouldn't that money be left in Medicare, which is trillions of dollars underfunded in terms of long-term liability?
Yeah, they just didn't get, and most people I did 18 town hall meetings in August, and I didn't have any YouTube moments, thankfully, but it was, most people say, well, okay, so you're dealing with a problem of 15% we say we got to help 15% who are underinsured or uninsured. Why do you have to mess with the other 85% of us? That was the question that seniors were asking, and people that work hard every day and have health insurance through their employer.
So, what's your take on the House bill that's in front of us in terms of whether or not it's remotely possible that would be deficit neutral, which is one of the president's conditions?
No, it absolutely will not be. I mean, I think the last scoring was $1.6 trillion, and that sounds low to me. And the only reason that it's only $1.6 trillion into the red is because the other thing that people were mad about is some of these taxes and some of these Medicare cuts would start the day the bill is signed. The benefits that they're touting, whether it's the public option or all these other things, don't start until 2013. So they're going to collect everybody's increased taxes for 4 years, then start the program. If the program started today with the taxes, it'd probably be $3 trillion.
Wow, that's pretty staggering.
Yep.
Tell me what your take is, probably more on our side, obviously, than the Senate side. There's been a lot of discussion about the public option, what kind of role that would play. The president said that's what he would want, but it's not absolutely essential. The speaker has said that it is absolutely essential in terms of at least passing the House. So what's your take on it as a concept and whether or not it'll be in the final bill?
Well, I mean, for me, the public option is the first step towards where I think some of these folks want to go, and that's the Conyers bill, and that's the single-payer, government-run national health care system, like Canada, like the United Kingdom. So for me, it's a non-starter. I don't think it's a good idea. And anybody that thinks that the public option can compete fairly with private insurance, I mean, you can't compete against the government fairly. And so they will drive all of the private insurance market out of business. In terms of its success, I said this, people, I had some people get in my face at some of these town hall meetings, and they said, "You Republicans are standing in the way." I said, well, after the last 2 elections, there's only 178 of us in the House. There's 257 Democrats. We couldn't stop a one-car funeral. So this is a fight amongst themselves. They can't even decide whether the public option is a good idea or a bad idea. And there are Democrats, to their credit, who are concerned about what this thing costs and what it's going to do to people that have insurance and how we're going to, be taking this big chunk out of Medicare.
In terms of, we talked a little bit about the public option in terms of what it'll do to the private, insurance market. What do you think businesses will do if they have the option for a flat 8%? Businesses are already providing health care to their workers and say, I can pay 8% of payroll and be out of this forever.
Well, I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, again, like you, over August, I had a ton of small business men and women come up to me and say exactly that. Said, I employ 50 people. I give them health care. It's more than 8% of payroll. I'd be an idiot not to throw those people into the public plan, pay the 8% penalty, and so it's, and that may be the design too. I mean, that's how you get to the national single-payer system, is you get everybody in it. So it begins as optional, but pretty soon, hey, there's nobody else in any other plan. So I guess we're going to make this, this is the plan.
Well, in terms of, let's talk the politics of it for a minute. If you had to make a guess today, you're a very astute observer in the House of Representatives, because we have a group of Democratic members who said, I won't vote for a bill without the public option. We've got another group who are clearly under a lot of pressure at home not to support a bill like that. Right. The Senate recently, basically, at least in committee so far, has rejected the public option. Right. Do you think it's actually going to come to the floor for a vote in the House?
Yes. And I base that upon something that happened earlier this year, another horrible piece of legislation, cap and trade. And the cap and trade bill, you remember, but maybe some of your constituents don't, that we voted on that bill on a Friday. At 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday, they gave us 300 new pages and just put it into the bill, and then a few hours later we're voting on the thing. And what you find is people are getting embarrassed by those 300 pages. And they had to give us 300 new pages because they had to either break arms of their members or promise them enough stuff to get them to where they would vote for it. And that was, that vote wound up, I think it was 218 to 213. They would not have passed it, they being the majority on their own dime. There were 8 Republicans that supported that bill as well, to our dismay. And I think that they will begin, when they're serious, and they say, we're going to do it now, they will begin log rolling and promising bridges to nowhere and everything else. And, I think it's going to come to a vote, and I wouldn't be surprised. Speaker Pelosi is a very good politician, and I wouldn't be surprised if she can't muscle it out of here.
Let's assume for a minute they got the public option in the bill. What do you think the game, but we get a Senate bill heading into conference where these two very different creatures would be merged together. What do you think the odds are that would end up in the final bill, and how do you think that would play out?
Well, I don't think there's any stomach in the Senate for it. I mean, as by the committee vote this week, that taken it out, but there is hanging out there. And this, I really have to give credit to the voters these days, because they were bringing up to me at town hall meetings stuff that I had no idea that they knew anything about or cared about or anything else. So I had more than one question at these town hall meetings about reconciliation. And they said, hey, haven't they changed the rules in the Senate just to get this done so that they don't need 60 votes to get it to the floor? They can just do it with 51. And that, I think, is sort of the what if out there. And I do know that they are plotting a strategy to get something out of the House with the public option, get it over in the Senate. The majority of the senators aren't going to be crazy. Well, not the majority, but less than 60, and they may try and just jam it on reconciliation.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've heard the same level of sophistication of the questions. It's unbelievable. The number of people have downloaded the bill and can literally discuss it section by section. I tell you, it's a tribute to American democracy.
Well, and the internet. I mean, I had people come up to me. He said, "How do you feel about Section 230 on page 29?" I said, "Well, you got to give me a hand here. What is that?"
It was incredible. Well, let me ask you this in a process sense, because again, you've been around here, and you really are one of the more thoughtful people. And if there was going to be a bipartisan solution, I think on either side, people would be saying, well, Steve LaTourette's the kind of Republican that you can sit down and work a deal with. So, has there been any effort, from your view, to reach out and create a bipartisan product?
No, our leadership sent a letter to the president in May saying, work with us. I know that we just sent Dr. Bastani from Louisiana, who gave the Republican response to the president's address, to see the majority leader and try and find that 80%. And I read the majority leader's quote today, and he says, there's nothing there. And I've made the offer. I've called the president's folks and said, if you want to sit down and talk about the things that we think are the 80%, such as portability, so if you lose your job, you don't lose your insurance, that if you have a pre-existing condition, you shouldn't be excluded from it, that has malpractice insurance reform, so you don't drive doctors out of business and cause them to do tests and things that aren't really necessary just to keep the trial lawyers off their back. There are 5 or 6 things like that. Wellness, for instance. I was at the Scott's people are in Marysville, Ohio. They're the grass company that, he grows all your grass. They have a wellness center, and they made a deal with their employees that if you don't go, they're using the stick instead of the carrot. If you don't go to their wellness center, which is free, 4 days a week, you got to pay a little bit more than for your insurance. And they have seen insurance rates drop dramatically. They have seen absenteeism drop dramatically. And so those are things we can all agree on. But I don't suspect they're going to ask us.
Let's talk about that. You sort of went through a few things. If you, and just in your judgment of what's politically possible in the House, and you say we agree on 80%, what would be that 80% where you think there wouldn't be much of a problem in getting a pretty big Democratic and Republican buy-in?
I don't think either party would have serious objectors to the wellness concept, and that is that if you're a big fat smoker, maybe you should pay more money than the skinny health conscious person. And we should also do things to encourage that. And likewise, diabetes is a big disease process in this country.
Huge in Oklahoma.
What's that?
Well, we have a
diabetes,
big Native American population, so it's actually, we're way above the national average on that.
Well, and I think we all agree that it's better to teach someone who's diabetic or on the cusp of being diabetic how to eat, how to maintain their sugar, so that they don't get the gangrene in the foot, they don't go blind. We could all agree on wellness in that piece, I think. We could all agree on taking the restrictions off of the insurance companies dealing that you could only buy health insurance in Oklahoma today, I can only buy it in Ohio. Open it up, and so that you have 500 different choices all across the country. You can shop for best deal. I think we could do that. The portability aspect of it, that if you lose your job, your insurance goes with you, that it's not tied to your job, so you don't have to stay in a horrible job just because to protect your health care insurance. And the pre-existing condition. Again, if you open up the pool of insureds of the entire country, you can put people with pre-existing conditions into the insurance pool, and it won't completely skew the thing because their treatment is expensive. So those are 4 things that tomorrow, and one we couldn't get, but I think some Democrats would want to vote on, would be tort reform. I mean, it's ridiculous if, we got people running around saying health care is a right and everybody has to have health care. I believe with the second, not the first. but that you don't do anything about the lawyers who file these lawsuits. So that's something that we all could agree on, and I bet we could get some Democrats.
You know, interesting enough, I think we could get a lot of Democrats. Of course, we passed it out of the House twice, right, and we could never get to the 60 in the Senate. But now you have a Democratic administration that's going to have to confront an awful deficit problem. A lot of it driven by health care related spending, right, and Medicare and Medicaid, and a variety of other programs. So why in the world wouldn't you finally, at this juncture, if only to deal with the deficit problem, resort to what in the past most of your members have been reluctant to do?
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other thing is innovation. I don't know if you have them in Oklahoma, but in Ohio now, at our chain stores, the CVS pharmacies and things like that, you can go in. I don't have to make an appointment with my doctor if I have a sore, scratchy throat and I want to have a throat culture. They swab me in the back of the pharmacy. It costs a couple of bucks. They call me and tell me that it's clear, it's not clear. If it's not clear, you obviously got to go see the doctor. But there's no reason that we can't look at ways like that to reduce the immediate input to the medical field, and that is you don't have to see a doctor every time.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let me ask you, again, a political question. What's your sense of timing as to when legislation will begin to move in the House of Representatives?
My sense, and from the time that you and I were in the majority, I call them happier days, is that stuff moves when it's ready, when they think that they can put up 218 votes. And they said it was going to be on August the 1st or July 30th. That didn't happen. They said it was going to be early September. That didn't happen. They said it was going to be the end of September. That didn't happen. And now, the speaker's saying it's going to be next week or a couple of weeks from now. They're not there yet. And so they have not cooked the deal necessary to get 218 votes. And so if you want to bet a buck, I would say it happens sometimes after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I think so too. I think at least today. I think partly because of August, partly because again, the more people look at this thing, the less they like it. Yeah. That they've lost ground. I saw some polling, national polling, Rasmussen, nonpartisan, not either side, that the country was running 56-41 against the overall bill, and among seniors, right, the people that are probably following it the most closely and have the most directly at stake, 59-33. So those are big numbers, in terms of trying to convince people to get onto this thing.
Well, and what I found, and I'm sure you found the same thing, is some people hate it, but a lot of people are just confused by the conflicting messages out there. And they think that their government's not listening to them and answering their questions. For instance, when they marked up this H.R. 3200, which is the House bill, the president came to the United States Congress and said, if you like what you got, you can keep it. Well, since then, his press secretary has said, well, you can't take the president literally. He knows that, 14 million Americans are going to lose Medicare Advantage. But, the Republicans on our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, tested that. Cliff Stearns of Florida had a one-sentence amendment that said, nothing in this bill will prevent you from keeping the insurance you have if you like it. And it was defeated. All the Democrats voted against it. Now, what that does to my constituents who are very savvy and are following this thing closely, they say, well, wait a minute. If that's true, why would you not put that into the bill in language that we can understand? And, it's that way on people not in the country lawfully. I mean, we've had that discussion. We've had the discussion on abortion. I mean, they say that abortion services aren't going to be covered under the bill. But, we have some of their colleagues having their town hall meetings. You bet they're covered. Well, which is it? I mean, and we had that unfortunate thing with Joe Wilson yelling out at the president during that speech. But when he yelled out, it was on the question of we're not going to cover people that are in the country illegally. And the president said we're not. Well, the proof for me was in the pudding when 2 days later the White House had to come out with a statement and said, you know what, we think the bill as currently written may allow some people that are in the country unlawfully to be covered. And so we're reinforcing we don't think that's a good idea.
Well, it was nice that they did say that, but, and I'm sure they were well aware of this. We already had testimony in Ways and Means by the Congressional Budget Office experts that absent some sort of verification, right, you would have 6 to 8 million people using this. So What we had was a bill that was the political equivalent of posting a speed limit sign and putting right under it, not radar enforced,
right.
no police in the neighborhood. You're on the honor system.
Right.
And, you can't expect the healthcare professionals to start asking for something that's not required.
That's right.
They're going to deal with the people that show up and they're sick.
That's right.
And then they're going to send us the bill, and
That's
it's going to be pretty substantial.
No, that's right.
So, I'm going to ask you to get out of our body and do what's unthinkable, speculate about the Senate, which is, a mystical and mysterious place. What do you think happens over there?
I don't think, as I said earlier, that there's enough support to do the public option, except for the reconciliation thing that we talked about, that is sort of the 800-pound gorilla. And I don't know what they do. I mean, my bet would be they don't produce a bill. I mean, that if I had to bet, if they don't come up with something tricky on this reconciliation process, I don't know that they can get enough senators to row in the same direction and get this thing done.
Yeah, another process question. I shouldn't be doing this because people are always not interested in process, but I got more process questions at home
me too.
on this than I ever have before.
Me too.
Do you think we would vote ahead of the Senate? In other words, the House would actually take the bill up in an effort to bring pressure on the Senate to act?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the House, even when we were in the majority, is sort of the lightning rod. We push whatever the agenda is much more rapidly than the Senate ever has. And I would be surprised if Speaker Pelosi didn't put the vote on first here to put that pressure on the Senate.
Okay, that's true. Let me ask you something that's been kind of around the edges of the debate. Probably not fair to ask you this on film, and you're allowed to equivocate because I'm going to equivocate up front. I'm not sure how I feel about this. But one of the other ideas that's been tossed out there, as an exchange for wider markets and national markets, or at least and concessions out of the insurance companies in terms of portability and pre-existing conditions, the idea of mandated coverage for those who can pay for it, because we do know we have a considerable part of the uninsured population that literally can pay for it. They tend to be either so rich they decide they don't need insurance, or much more likely so young they think that they'll never need insurance. And what do you think about the idea of that as a revenue stream? I'm
not a big fan of that. I mean, the Senate started out that if you didn't get insurance or have insurance, you had to pay a fine, a tax of $3,800. Now they've skinnied that up to $1,900. That's a lot of money. And so I think our goal should be to, one, look at the underinsured and the uninsured and figure out how we can bring them under a Medicaid net or whatever the case may be, so that it's available to them. So nobody has to go without if they don't want to go without. But there's probably a constitutional question in there someplace if you say, you got to have a policy of health insurance and this is what it has to look like and here's what you have to pay or we're going to fine you. I think there comes a point where it's a big point, you got to take care of yourself, and you have to assume some personal responsibility. And I would prefer instead that if you're capable, if you're able, and you've made a decision, and it's not a decision between food and health care. I mean, it's not one of those economic decisions, but you're 18 and you'd rather buy beer than have health insurance, then when something happens to you, shame on you. I mean, not that we're not going to take care of you, but shame on you. I think that, I'm not in favor of taking care of people who won't take care of themselves.
What sorts of things would you consider would be helpful in terms of incentivizing both small businesses? I used to run a small business. They usually are pretty low profit enterprises. They don't have big reserves, and quite often the labor involved in them is fairly unskilled and is not profitable. So getting health insurance really is a legitimate problem for mom and pop operations all across the country. What are the sorts of things we could do to encourage them to take the plunge, so to speak? And then we have a big pool of individual payers out there as well, and I've been in that pool at various times in my life, who don't have much bargaining advantage and or are in terrible shape. What are the sorts of things could be done to help them get insurance or provide it?
Well, one of the things that we passed a bunch of times here and couldn't get our friends in the Senate to do are association health plans. So, for instance, we have a Democratic member from Ohio that's a funeral director. Well, all the funeral directors in America could have the funeral director's health plan, and they could use that purchasing power to buy. And you could do that with florists. You could do that with a whole variety of things. In addition, For those that don't, belong to one of those small business groups that could join with another small business group, and you really should make the membership in that as non-restrictive as possible. So, if you're really, you're not a florist, but you're a greenhouse, maybe you could still join the florist thing. But the other thing is, for those that don't belong in those groups, there's a combination of tax credits and tax incentives and expansion of Medicaid, quite frankly, on the state level, that could take care of, I think, almost everybody.
Well, I tell you, when I was in private business and purchasing my own health insurance, I have a wife who has MS, so which we were on insurance, and then that was fine. We found out then, and then we're in a situation where we no longer had employer-provided insurance, so we had to sort of bite the bullet and do what was necessary. But what really used to frost me was buying my insurance with after-tax dollars, when everybody else, almost everybody else, was getting it with pre-tax dollars. What about the idea of allowing individual purchasers? The moral distinction of why one group of Americans should use the dollars pre-tax, and another group, should not have that same tax advantage, just escapes me.
Yeah, me too. And I don't know if you participate in our program here, but I'm able to take pre-tax dollars and invest them into something called a flexible spending account. And so those things that aren't covered, people think we have these Cadillac policies that don't have dental, they don't have eye care. But when I go to the dentist, I'm able to take that money that I paid in pre-tax and pay for the dentist bill. And I think every American should have that. The other sort of anomaly that we picked up, real strong during these town hall meetings is, and you and I have had the chance to vote on this, so I'm going to brag on you again, that people say to me all the time, and I blame the president for saying we got some fancy-schmancy policy. We don't. I have an 80-20 Blue Cross policy through the federal government. I'm sure you do, too.
I had better health insurance working at the Republican National Committee than we have. And ours is perfectly fine.
Oh, it's fine.
But it's the same that the workers at Tinker Air Force Base in my district have, or Fort Sill. It's just, or the mail carriers. It's just a federal policy.
And it's not, and it's tied still to Oklahoma in your case and Ohio in my case. So I have, it's the same as I could get back home. But we, in our Appropriations Committee, you may remember, offered an amendment that if this public option is such a swell idea, why don't you have all members of Congress and their families have to be in this new plan? Well, you remember what happened to the amendment. It was defeated. You and I voted for it, and our Democratic colleagues voted against it. Took it down.
Now, that's actually another one of our colleagues who is a physician, John Fleming from Louisiana, has offered legislation that would require those that vote for it actually go into the public plan. I've said publicly, look, if we do a public plan, then I think you ought to require everybody from Congress to go in. It's probably your best insurance you'll have, that you'll actually have a good plan.
That's right. I agree with you.
$64,000 question here. Do we get a bill by the end of the year that actually passes and reaches the president's desk and signed, or not?
I don't think so. I think this bleeds into next year. He could have one. Again, if he would focus on that 80% and get rid of some of these things that really divide us. And I just don't think the left of the Democratic Party will let them do that.
Well, on that, I'm going to have to end, but that allows me to say, if we don't have a bill by next year, you have to come back. Explain this again. But we're just about out of time. And Steve, I want to thank you tremendously for coming by. You're actually just a delight and a pleasure to serve with, and it's wonderful to have that opportunity. So in this episode on Cole for Congress, Steve LaTourette's been our guest. I'm Congressman Tom Cole from our nation's capital. Thank you for joining us.